It's pretty clear that defense needs a nerf. Let's make that very, very clear. At 6 Invitational, 58.4% win rate to the defense, which is one of, if not the highest ever.
And on top of that, the return to form for BDS. So out of a lot of the regions this stage, I felt like Europe had actually some really good, solid storylines that did play out.
But the map veto system, we were super, super perplexed when we found out about this. And we initially thought that it was not a particularly great idea. We didn't like it very much, and it seems like that has been echoed through a lot of the player sentiment and feedback that I have personally seen.
To be completely blunt, it should be really a case where if we performed well at the previous event, and we did because we got given the SI Grand Final, and I thought we did an incredibly good job, that we probably should have got Manchester off of that. We didn't. Maybe there's circumstances as to the reason why, but alas, as you've kind of just pointed out before, this is not our first rodeo. We missed out on Atlanta. We missed out on events for years. I don't want to say that it's fine, because I think in some ways I want to kind of change my approach on it. I want to go from saying, oh, it's fine or whatever, to maybe not kicking up a stink or anything, but using that as fuel. Let's get underway here for episode 22 here for what is the Manchester Major preview. And once again, we're at home, Guzz. No studio action, unfortunately, just yet. Hopefully not too far away from becoming a reality once again, but we figured it'd be good to obviously get back on. We've been a little bit slack with our scheduling. It has been quite a turbulent few months, though. We've had a lot of work throughout stage one, so obviously we've been pretty booked out and busy.
Yeah, it's been pretty flat out. I feel like we've been working every day. And when we haven't, I've been wanting to do anything but think about Siege. So it's good to have a little bit of a break now. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the content that we pushed out from 6 Invitational, Interior Interview, Foxake, Pengu. All of them were amazing. But yeah, keen to start chatting about Manchester and how stage 1 played out.
Yeah, just before we get into Manchester very quickly, last week, new patch came out, which did have a couple of minor little changes. I don't think anything too crazy in the grand scheme of things. The Azami nerf has continued, with the Keeper barriers being a little bit more susceptible to the damage that those Keeper barriers can take, along with, of course, Legion getting a very minor nerf, and mainly just around the damage that the goo mines actually do, along and coupled with the refill time. Then you got the impact grenade nerf, which maybe is the biggest nerf of them all, I think, out of that patch that did come through. What are your thoughts on it? Because I don't look at this patch being something that's going to shake up the meta.
Yeah, I think you're right. Impact grenades, at least from what I saw, had the biggest, I suppose, response from the community. I think every patch tends to have a negative response for the most part. That just tends to be the way. However, this one probably wasn't as negative as most. I think generally speaking, it was relatively well received. It's pretty clear that defense needs a nerf. Let's make that very, very clear. At 6 Invitational, 58.4% win rate to the defense, which is one of, if not the highest ever. And I think for the first time, there's been a real sync top down, whether it be from a pro level to ranked to casual. Everyone, for different reasons, pretty much agrees that defense at the moment is very, very strong, and attacking is quite frustrating. So to alleviate that, we are going to have to see nerfs. That's just the nature of the game. I think some people were a little bit scared that the impact nerf at this current point in time risks over-tuning shields too much. We know obviously they got reworked heading into this particular stage. At pro level, they have been strong, not quite broken yet, but they have been strong. I mean, Monty has been frequently banned. We've seen a lot of teams in various regions really exploit that, even Blitz as well. So I can understand why some people are a little bit afraid of that, but it has been tuned. I'm almost certain they changed how the shields react. So yeah, the explosion threshold also got reduced. So impacts still are a good counter to shields. And I think this nerf is just in response to impacts being good at literally everything. You can make rotates, you can damage opponents, especially shields. You can impact trick. And so these nerfs just adjust them a little bit. I think impacts will still have their place in the meta. They're just not going to be the tool that can do everything all the time, which in Siege, nothing should be. So I think overall, pretty positive changes, and shouldn't really be absolutely dramatic to the point where shields are just absolutely OP, although maybe we'll see that exploited at the major. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I agree. I think in some ways, tying back to the frag grenade nerf that we saw a couple of months ago as well for the attackers, which, to be fair, those nerfs were for different reasons. I think it was still a very simple case of doing too much. And I think the impact grenade nerf is going to fall in line with that, just being able to do too much. But again, to kind of summarize for the patch, I don't see it really changing a whole lot when it does come to, say, the major, for example, which does kind of mean then the defensive win rate, which is globally at like 58.4% now, will remain. So you want to round that up 60%, and it's been that way now for what feels like quite some time. This patch is certainly not going to change that. I don't know realistically what can change that, but what I will say is that over the last few months, clearly there has been some indication that, at least from Ubisoft's perspective, they are looking to bring some of the power away from defense. And I was going to say bring the power to attack, but it doesn't seem like they're going in that avenue. Rather than buffing attack, it seems like they're trying to maybe nerf defense a little bit. We've seen that with a couple of operator nerfs, and now obviously with impact grenades, for example. So I think to change that figure, to change that percentage, they're going to have to do both. There's going to have to be a slight nerf to defense along with a buff to attack. What that looks like, how that looks like, I'm not too sure exactly. But it is quite intriguing that, you know, if we were to go back to when they changed the frag grenade nerfs and we think about like how defender side of the game is now, would you actually have made that change knowing full well what was actually to come?
I mean, I was always a big fan of the grenade nerf and its design and implementation. I think the timing was maybe a little bit premature. Now, we know that Fenrir and Solos are getting nerfed very, very soon. That's on the roadmap and was confirmed in the update. So I very much see that as probably tilting things back more in favor of attack, just because of how suppressive those operators are. Would the frag grenade nerf probably have been better timed in line with that? Yes, probably, I think, in hindsight, but it's just the position that we find ourselves in now. So I think in 6 months, it's going to be really intriguing to see if that defensive win rate does taper off a little bit. But it's not just win rate, it's also the perception of attack being frustrating. I mean, like, it could still be like a 50-50 fair split. If attacking still feels unfair and unrewarding, that's more important than the number at the end of the day. And again, that's why balancing is so challenging, because you're not only trying to balance objective metrics, but it's also the subjective perception of the game, which is very different for everybody from a pro level down to casuals. But I think everyone is in alignment, generally speaking, that defense is in a bit of a weird spot at the moment. Everyone has different ideas on how to fix that, how to patch it. But very intrigued to see, yeah, once Solus and Fenrir come through, the game should get a bit of a switch up.
Yeah, short little notice here as well before we get into our stage 1 review that there was a delay to the reputation system. It's now being pushed back to season 4, so we're not going to be getting that anytime soon, unfortunately. I think that's actually the only update regarding the mid-season roadmap. So nothing too crazy, I guess. We're not missing out on too much there. But yeah, just a kind of little note on the reputation system being delayed. And we can go into the stage 1 review now for what felt like a pretty lengthy stage, all things considered. And only just now have we kind of been able to get a bit of a break from all of the action. I guess in some ways, we can kind of summarize, I think, the stage being largely successful in terms of entertainment value. But there's always been this kind of trope regarding, are there almost too many player days? The main channel's like never offline. Is this something that we kind of want to see get tinkered with? It's not going to happen for this year, but maybe next year onwards. Do we need to change up the way the stages work a little bit?
Yeah, so I think someone can obviously correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I do believe that this stage was elongated a little bit compared to 2023, and that was in direct response to the feedback. Like, that feedback was heard. It was definitely noted by Blast and Ubisoft. They're aware of it. The question is, how do you actually resolve it? Because you're trying to balance so many different things. The two biggest is obviously, you know, viewer engagement and viewership of the stage itself, but then it's also aligning the end of the stage close enough to the major where people still care, and you could obviously extend out the stage by finishing closer to the major. But then you also need to take into account the logistics of players preparing for the major, and especially things like visas. Visas are the biggest vein in esports. It's such a huge issue, very common, especially over in like the US and shit like that. I don't know if EU's really as bad. Generally speaking, it's a little bit more lax. Maybe UK is different now with Brexit. I have no idea, but we're not going to get into the politics of that. So I do agree. I think in an absolutely perfect world, we would be able to create a fixture that was elongated for like, let's say 2 months, spaced out nicely, and finished like 2 weeks before the major. Is that actually a realistic prospect in the current climate that we're in? I don't know. I think if it was, it would be executed upon. Again, there's so many different moving parts that it's really, really challenging. But yeah, if it was spaced out, it would be better for everyone, I think.
All right, let's get into the nitty gritty though, and we go through pretty much all of the regions that possibly we can. Fortunately, we got some help for today's episode from members of the broadcast community. We'll start with EU though first. Now, mind you, as of recording this, we're kind of waiting on Fresh and see if he's going to come through and help us out here with some information. But we probably don't need him for all of it. What's been the rise though of ITB into the breach has been well renowned throughout the community for what's been a tremendous stage. They've qualified for the home majors as well. I mean, that right there is a story from EU that I think should bode well for that region, that, hey, it's not just the same old, same old. And on top of that, the return to form for BDS. So out of a lot of the regions this stage, I felt like Europe had actually some really good, solid storylines that did play out.
I mean, Team Secret as well, right? Knocking Wolves down into that LCQ. ITB, as you mentioned as well, knocking down G2. So there's been a real, I suppose, changing of the guard in EU. And that's actually kind of a trend that we're going to see pop up a little bit throughout this first stage across multiple regions. So yeah, really exciting to see how those guys are going to actually do on the international stage. Domestic competition is obviously different to the level of overseas. Obviously, as we mentioned before, I mean, we were literally working 5 days a week, and the last thing on my mind was Siege. So especially with time zones and stuff, actually following EU closely, very, very tough. But incredible storyline to see these up and coming teams put in the really hard work and create strong teams is really, really impressive. And I think it puts the rest of the league on notice. It's not a case now where the likes of, G2 and Wolves can just continue to, not that they were, but they can't rely on cruising through to major positions going forward. Also, probably a quick note on Fnatic, a disappointing stage again from them. We love you, Jigsaw. We hope you're enjoying your time over in EU, but that project so far hasn't yielded the success that they probably would have wanted.
No, and there's a couple of other tidbits too, like Virtus Pro. I mean, they were not that far away from making the grand final of the Six Invitational, and they got knocked out by ENCE in the LCQ. They didn't perform well in the group stage either. We've kind of touched on Wolves. They too also lost to ENCE. So that's what I'm kind of saying. Like for EU, it's like a bit of a shake-up. No VP, no Wolves. But G2 did make it out of LCQ, so they will round out the four from Europe. Now, if we did get a helping hand from Fresh, we'll insert that now.
So Fresh did get back to us with some hot takes heading into the major for each of the EU representatives. Starting off with ITB, his hot take is that they are a dark horse for a main stage run. They're a home team of the event, essentially, but people won't even really know who they are. Oscar will provide some absolute rat magic, hiding sandbags on Oregon, meeting, etc., and be crazy. Creeds will send herds back to Brazil. For G2, Fresh simply said, no comment. And for Secret, I think we'll be outclassed everywhere, but I'm hoping for Adrian to have a huge tournament.
Otherwise, we can move on to NAL, which we know for a fact we do have a bit of a helping hand here. We don't need to speak too much about this ourselves. Why don't we let our good friend Jesse Chick do the talking for us?
Hello, Guzz and Xenox. I am here to tell you why Beast Coast are going to win the major. Probably not. But I am here to tell you all about Beast Coast and maybe where they came from. Sorry if this is too long. I'm going to ramble. I think part of the reason why Beast Coast feel like they came out of nowhere, obviously it's not the most prestigious organization, but they also had a pretty weak start to the season. They didn't play week 1 in the North American League, and week 1 in the NAL was cut short due to technical issues, and Beast Coast in particular didn't play week 1 at all because they were supposed to play Mirage, and of course that team stopped existing pretty quickly. So they didn't get to play week 1. Every other team did. They came into week 2, and I really think for a lot of teams, in Siege, your first week back into a new season is kind of where you figure things out. You fix a lot of kind of basic problems. And since Beast Coast didn't have that, they struggled in that first week. And they had to play 3 games in their first week, everybody else's second week, where they really didn't look so good. They lost every single one of those games. That was to Luminosity, Oxygen, and Wildcard. Frankly, not great teams. But since then, Beast Coast have not lost a single series, going on a clean 5-0 run through the end of the playoffs, or through the end of the groups to finish first place in the group stage, and then winning both their playoff games. They did drop one map to Dark Zero, but otherwise extremely clean so far. I really think so much of the credit has to go to Hot and Cold. This is not a team which is just out gunning everybody, frankly. I mean, they're good on the gun skill front, but I really think the team has, especially after that second week, given Hot and Cold the reins and just have decided we're going to let you choose what we're going to play, where we're going to play, make the strats, tell us what to do, and we're all going to listen. And I think this is the most control Hot and Cold's probably had on a team in a very long time, maybe ever. And I think he needs a ton of the credit for really this team's success so far. I think the Monty has to be talked about as well. Hot and Cold has played a ton of Monty this stage. They've picked Monty in 41% of all attacking rounds, and they've got a 52% win rate with the Operator. They nearly won more rounds on Monty than every other North American team combined this season. It was close. I think it was like 16 rounds for Beast Coast, 18 rounds or so for every other team. So it was close, didn't quite make the stat, but they're playing Monty a ton, and they're winning with it a ton. The gun skill is certainly there for this team, as I've been saying. Gunner's been really leading the charge. I think he's been a fantastic entry, bringing a lot of that energy to the team, being really good on the opening picks. Spirits has been good as well. I would call him the best boss GA-Cog player in the entire world. He seems to love that gun. He loves shotguns in general, and I expect to see that coming out a couple of times in the Manchester Major. And then I think when you really come down to it, this team is also just the most clutch team in all of North America. Both Diffuser and Gavin had 5 clutches this stage. Kino was the most of any player in North America with 6. So to have 2 players placing second place, basically, in terms of most clutches is insane. Diffuser can't be talked about enough. He really wasn't supposed to be on this roster. He was a last-second pickup. He did win Element 2, which is the Tier 2 North American tournament that happened over the offseason. So he's not a complete unknown player, but that run from Diffuser and the roster of Envy was really unexpected for a lot of people. Nobody expected that team to win Element 2. Nobody expected Diffuser to then get picked up in a Tier 1, and nobody expected them to be their best player, statistically at least, on Beast Coast. He's really passive. He's really smart. He's got an insane KD, not just because he gets a ton of kills, but because he doesn't die, really, unless it's a really necessary death. He's very good at staying alive, playing his life, and playing with the team. When they go for some of these Monty pushes, when they go for these strategies, he's always locked in, playing his role, and often is set up to get a lot of those really important late-round frags. So everybody on this team has honestly been playing super, super great. I think it really speaks to how bad they want it. You know, a lot of these players were cut from quote-unquote better teams, and I think that's really empowered them to want it very badly, and they've been putting a ton of work in, and they just have so much fun. I mean, you watch this team play, and they're just laughing, they're having a great time. You know, they know that they shouldn't be winning this many games, and they're happy to prove everybody wrong and go on the run that they've been on. I do think it's unlikely we're going to see them win the Manchester Major. Despite being number 1 seed in North America, I think it took a long time for NA teams to really figure out Beast Coast and start countering them. We didn't really see Monty getting banned against Beast Coast too often until right up against in the grand finals. Despite it being by far the most important operator for Beast Coast success, part of that is because their semifinals game, well, a lot of their later group stage games were against kind of terrible teams. Like Los, for example, I believe was their final matchup. They won that 7-0. And then in the semifinals, they played against Dark Zero, but that was a Dark Zero team who, A, perma-banned Stokoby, so they weren't going to ban Monty against Beast Coast. And B, it's a Dark Zero team that had already been playing for like 9 hours due to tech pauses. This was our 3rd BO3 of the day. The day had gone super long, so Dark Zero were really, really tired. Beast Coast hadn't played a game that day going into that series. So I do think that helped out Beast Coast to an extent. And then the grand finals, Beast Coast versus M80, I think Beast Coast just wanted it more. You know, I think Beast Coast, it was important for them to win out the whole NAL, finish first place, shove it in everybody else's faces like, you dropped us, you made a mistake, now watch as we win the whole league. M80, especially at the start, you know, on Clubhouse, I think M80 were mostly just kind of having fun with it. They did, you know, they brought the second map over to overtime, and they were trying to win for sure, but I don't think they wanted it the same way Beast Coast did. So, yeah, I think Beast Coast are a great team, super talented, maybe a little bit one-dimensional with the Monty plays that they rely on a lot. But they've addressed that themselves in interviews, and they've talked about how they want to widen themselves a little bit to have more strats going into Manchester. So I think they'll be a threat to knock some teams out. I think if a good team plays against Beast Coast in the later rounds of Swiss and they don't respect them, if they maybe aren't doing their proper VOD review, or if they're just maybe not playing it like it's a serious game, they're absolutely going to get knocked on their asses and get kicked out of the tournament. Beast Coast can beat almost any team in the entire world, but I think when you test them over a long period of time, I think when you get to the quarterfinals or the later rounds of Swiss, they probably will start falling, and I don't expect them to make it too far in the tournament. But it's a great team. Super exciting. The best story that we've had in North America for a long time in my mind. And I'm hoping for a good showing in Manchester, taking out some top teams, I'm hoping, and to continue to see them grow throughout the offseason in Stage 2.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jesse, for all of his insights there for NAL. And look, honestly, a region that I think is starting to, I don't want to say fall behind, Guzz, that's probably not the right word, but there are other regions that are starting to catch up to NAL, and they've got to start putting in some good performances internationally. Yeah,
obviously, again, huge shout out to Jesse, really focusing in on Beast Coast. And that's why I asked him specifically to talk about, because when I was seeing the NAL results play out, I was like, how the fuck are these guys topping NAL? This is insane. Sure, they've got great players, the likes of Gunner, Hot and Cold, and other names in the mix that have shown good performance over time. But the fact that, Hot and Cold has kind of taken the helm of this team and has taken them to the top. I don't know how much of that is them being really good and maybe NAL falling off a little bit. I would honestly probably say it's elements of both. But yeah, excited to see, as Jesse highlighted, the Monty play from them. That has been a huge win condition for them. Really strong win rate. We'll see if teams overseas want to deal with that, ban it out. Again, maybe with impact nerfs as well. We could actually see Beast Coast even be bolstered in that regard. So yeah, excited to see BC play out. M80 second as well is honestly a little bit of a surprise, right? Because the talking point for them at the back end of 2023 and even heading into SI was that they'd basically fallen off the face of the earth, but they seem to be back. And Dark Zero remain in touch. Good old Canadian and the boys continue to put in these solid performances and qualify for international events. So yeah, super keen to see how NAL goes. I don't know if they've shown enough this stage to make a case that they're strong contenders for winning the event or having a team in the mix, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, those two teams you mentioned as well, both knocking out Oxygen from the playoffs after they finished in second. Oxygen then went on to lose in the LCQ. So from matching what Beast Coast was able to do to then not making the major at all, would somewhat be, I guess, a bit of a disappointment for them. But NAL, always good fun. And again, big thank you to Jesse for all of his help there in giving us some information for that region. We've also got a little bit more help as well from Gibson coming in as well for the Brazilian region, of course, the Kings of the Hammer. And let's see what he has to say.
Hey guys, Gibson Casts here, and I'm delighted to have been asked on by Jake and Guzz for their preview of the Manchester Major to talk about E1, the great disruptors of Brazil. When you think of Brazil, you think of teams like Furia, FaZe Clan, W7M, Team Liquid, NIP, Black Dragons. Nobody really thinks about E1. And what they've managed to achieve is to upset the balance of that region by qualifying for the major. Not through the LCQs, by the way. They did it in playoffs. First time of asking, they made it all the way. Now, this is a roster at the start of the year that when I saw it, I was really excited about. I was like, so much potential, but it was a long-term project, in my opinion. I thought, you know what? Stage 1, Stage 2, get better and better. Maybe find themselves in a position where they could maybe make a run at SI through the LCQs that are being brought back in this year. But they have surprised expectations of everybody and done it at the very first stage. Now, the way that they got to the major is a funny story because they've actually not beaten, in the regular season at least, a single team with a winning record. In fact, every single team above them in the table beat them, and they made it to the playoffs with a 4-5 record. So they were negative overall going into the playoffs, which made everybody think that they would be easy pickings for the likes of Black Dragons, who they'd be playing in the very first round. So I think the big thing to note is they massively changed their play style going into playoffs. Over the regular season, their gameplay on attack was focused on, getting the case down, playing objective, and it worked out pretty well for them. I think they got, was it roughly 20 plus plants over the course of the season. Arthur got 18 by himself, which puts him up there with the highest amount of plants in the world. But didn't really work. When they were getting the case down, they were losing some post-plant situations. Their attacking win rate wasn't as high as you would expect it to be. So you kind of felt like they were rushing things just a little bit in a region where if you rush, you're going to get punished. So going into the playoffs, things changed just a little bit. In fact, it changed so much that over the course of the first best of 3 series they played against Black Dragons, they only got the case down twice. So they focused more on just getting 3-3 halves on attack. A lot of those round ones were won by just eliminating all the defenders. A little bit more similar to what the other teams inside of Brazil would have done. But where they really excelled in playoffs was on their defense. They were rock solid. In the whole of the playoffs, so I'm not going to include the final against FaZe Clan because they were already qualified at that point. So to me, I'm just focusing on the first best of 3 and the second best of 3 against W7M. They played 20 rounds on defense. They won 16 of them. That's an 80% win rate. Black Dragons, over 2 maps, only took 2 attacking rounds against them. And it was the same for W7M. Over 2 maps, they only took 2 attacking rounds. Actually, funnily enough, those 2 attacking rounds both those teams got against them was on one of the maps. So they essentially 4-0'd twice on their defense, which was how they qualified for the major, being rock solid. Few things to note though. Their overall play over the stage was very curious. You know, not a single map went to overtime. Every single game was won in a regulation. So I believe you got to ask a lot of questions as to how they'll perform in a situation where they find themselves playing in overtime and maybe they're on attack and overtime first and might not just suit them. But there'll be a lot of fun. You know, you look at the likes of STK, he went nuclear against W7M. He was an excellent to watch over the course of the whole season. Perez was probably their best player. So they do have firepower. They will be a fun team to keep an eye on, but overall expectations, not that high. I think they'll win. They'll definitely win 1 game in Swiss. They'll probably win 2. I'm not quite sure if they'll be able to win that 3rd match that'll qualify them for the main stage, but they're definitely a team that will cause some upsets. I still think that even though they qualified through the playoffs and not LCQs, that they are the 4th team in Brazil. Just feel like Liquid were significantly better over the last couple of play days, but you know what? They only played 2 best of 3s to qualify for the major. They won both of them 2-0. So they're looking pretty good. I think they'll have a lot of fun. They're way ahead of where they're supposed to be. I think that makes them dangerous because maybe expectations mightn't be as high going into this event. But all in all, there'll be a ton of fun to watch. I think if you're thinking about how they'll play, I feel like they'll play very similar to how Brazil like to. Keep the defenses rock solid. Try keep the numbers level. They don't really have a clutch player that'll win multiple 1vx scenarios. Like if you look at their stats over the course of the season, very few times that you'll actually find that they won 1vx's to take rounds. So if they're going to do it, it'll be really long games. It'll be one off the back of their defenses where they're keeping the numbers level. They're not giving away easy picks, and they've got that defensive clock on lock. But that's kind of it for E1. I could speak about them a lot longer than this. I know Jake and Guzz know that, as we spoke a little bit about it. But guys, all I can say is I hope you all look forward to the major. I think E1 will definitely be a fun team to watch. Again, I don't think they'll make it over the weekend, but keep your eyes on them. It'll be a lot of fun. And thanks for having me.
Big shout out to you, Gibson. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts there on the Brazilian region. All eyes certainly are going to be on Brazil. After SI, after being in Brazil, after W7M, now Furia Guzz. It really is the case of, can the dynasty continue? Can we see Brazil continue to just lift trophy after trophy?
Yeah, and I reached out to Gibson. I was like, hey, you casted that E1 W7M match. What are your thoughts on E1? Are they actually a serious contender? Again, another up-and-coming name in Global Siege, and we know how dangerous Brazil can be. Their competition over there is such high quality and so fierce that even teams that are, I suppose, on the rise, if you want to frame them in that fashion, from Brazil, automatically already going to being contenders at the international stage. We saw that from, loss at the last US major, for example, and there's no reason why, honestly, E1 couldn't do that again. Furia as well, the former W7M roster making that run as well that they had to qualify for the event. It wasn't 100% smooth sailing for them in this particular stage, but again, that's probably a reflection on how fierce competition continues to be in Brazil. And if Furia haven't already, created a dynasty, as someone has said before, if they go on to win this major and go 4 in a row, that would be really insane. And I think if they manage to pull that off, it then becomes even more challenging to say that they are not the best team to ever play the game, and then ultimately surpassing G2.
So we go over to Japan now, a region that we were unable to cover ourselves this particular stage. Would honestly love to cover a bit more Japan moving forward, but our good friend James Dev Martyr Stewart was able to cover it, and he's come through as well for a bit of a helping hand. James, over to you.
Hello, Jake and Guzz from the Jake and Guzz podcast. This is Patreon supporter Dev Martyr here, bringing you some hot information straight off the press about our favourite Japanese representatives at the Manchester Major, Scars, the best team in Japan for over a year now. Last year, it was all theirs. They won both Stage 1, they won Stage 2, and coming into 2024, they looked even better. While they did drop a few games in the round-robin phase, especially to teams like Vite, who somehow were incredible in round-robin and terrible when it came to the big games of the BO3s, Scars dropped barely any rounds. They completely destroyed Kinotrope, which is the third best team in that region, and then they took down CAG quite handily in the grand final as well. They're looking like the best team in Japan, no doubt about it, and some people would say the best team in APAC, but I think that's a bit of a stretch because of how good Bleed and Bliss have both been. Now, Scars do get seeded straight into Phase 2 of the Manchester Major, but the same thing happened back in Atlanta, and they did not win a single game in Atlanta. In fact, they didn't win a single game at the Six Invitational either. The last time that we saw Scars play an international match and actually look really hot was almost a year ago, way back in Copenhagen. That was their first ever international event. They stunned everybody. They started reasonably slow. The first big team that they played, they lost 7-2 to NIP, but they also had some very big games against, I guess, the lower mid-tier teams like D+, Revenant Esports, but the big game was when they qualified for main stage. They took down Space Station, obviously big household name in North America at the time, and still, those guys knocked SSG out of the Copenhagen Major and went to main stage. And when they were on main stage, they almost beat FaZe Clan, the eventual runner-ups of the tournament as well. So there's no doubt that Scars do have a lot of promise. They're a really solid team, but why haven't we seen them progress upwards in the last year? Well, I'm glad you asked, because there's one big addition coming into 2024, and that is that a big team called Northception in the Japanese region disbanded. They went to Copenhagen as well, believe it or not. And of course, it means that there has been a huge pickup. Nina has now joined Scars. He was probably the best fragger last year in Japan, despite not playing necessarily for one of the very top teams. Northception struggled in Stage 2, ended up disbanding. All these insane players then got distributed between all the other teams in the region, and there's no doubt who benefited the most from that. It was absolutely Scars. They now have both Rek and Nina, their most recent 2 pickups, which, by the way, it's only been 1 new pickup each year for the last 2 years, and the rest of this core roster dates way back to the good old days when these guys were Zepto ages and ages ago in the 2021 Japan Championship. But with this extra firepower, I know from talking to people like Fresh, and he tends to know what he's talking about, Scars are looking like a very hot team. The question is, can they make main stage again? And I feel like if they have another Peter Out tournament like they did in Atlanta or in Brazil, then it's going to be a sore disappointment for this roster that, in theory, should be hitting new heights every tournament.
Well, as always, it's great to hear James's voice. It's always a pleasantry. We get to hear it on the regular. But it's more of the same for Japan, though, guys, of course. CAG, Scars, it's kind of the opposite to a lot of other regions where, in NAL and EUL, we're seeing teams come through that we don't typically see. But for Japan, it's more of the same.
Yeah. The big storyline for me that I wanted to tap into was really Scars. I mean, Cyclops now are like such a known factor, known quantity. I feel like we've talked to them to death for years that there's not really a whole lot more to add. Whereas for Scars, it's a little bit more intriguing because they went over to Copenhagen. They had quite a phenomenal run at that particular event. Fast forward to Atlanta, they dropped the bundle. So where do we actually place them now going into an additional international event? Again, Japan for them, actually quite smooth sailing. They did a really good job at confirming their position, locking themselves into stage 2. And so where to for Scars from here? Can they make another dent like they did at Copenhagen? Is it going to be much the same as we saw at Atlanta? It's so difficult to place them at the moment. I hope they do well. I don't know if they're going to be the strongest team from APAC, though. I think there's plenty of other teams that can make a case that they're probably in a better position than them, at least from that particular sub-region.
Yeah. So we'll go over to, I guess, the sister region. We'll go to South Korea. We were able to cover this, and what an intriguing stage it was for Korea. From day one all the way through to the final day of the LCQ, it had many twists and turns. and like, we'll be sitting here all day if we talk about every single twist and turn. But to go straight to the main talking point was the arrival of Fabian and Pengu and PSG Talon. And what that kind of whole team was able to do during this stage was quite phenomenal. They didn't really put a foot wrong. They were clearly, from the moment Fabian and Pengu got there, and you know, people talk about like, what is the influence from Pengu on the roster? Well, he was actively coaching them as well alongside Fabian. It wasn't just a content creation role. He was very much a part of that. And we've watched Talon for years. Yes, they made a major, but that was when they were like the 3rd seed, right? Like, and there was just really no other Korean teams that were that good, and they didn't really do anything either. It's the best we've seen them. So clearly the influence of what Fabian and Pengu were able to do with PSG Talon was quite extraordinary, and for how quick they were able to do it. Like, the turnaround from SI to start of stage 1 was very short, and I don't even know then what the turnaround was from them actually beginning with PSG Talent to then the stage starting. So what they were able to do in such a short span of time is actually quite incredible. Clearly ended up being the best team in the region. And then there were FearX, then there were D+, then there were Weeble. And if I remember correctly, there was one man here on the podcast that said that there is no world in which FearX are going to go to the major. Well, they got there.
Yeah, I'll flash up the tweet. Look, I mean, tapping into the FearX storyline, when I made that tweet, I believe it was week 2, South Korea, and I was watching that game on Border. I can't for the life of me remember who it was against, but they looked absolutely horrible. Like, just terrible. They were not playing good Siege at all. And Nova specifically, and again, it's not a personal vendetta, it's got nothing to do with him. He shouldn't even be on the team because he should be coaching. He looked like a fish out of water. And he was a big reason why they were really struggling. They didn't have a proper support to fill that role in at the time. But I tell you what, I must have magical powers because I made that tweet and I actually ran the numbers. I don't know if maybe I'll find them. After I made that tweet, his rating fucking skyrocketed. It almost doubled overnight. It was absolutely insane. And he actually genuinely became a big win condition for the team and fulfilled that support role so nicely. So that was quite a remarkable turnaround from FearX. Again, probably highlighting that the league phase doesn't really have a ton of importance, but I just didn't see them being able to turn it around in time. I mean, it had nothing to do with the league having more importance than I thought it did. So impressive from them. And D+ miss out with PSG Talon taking that spot, and it was a big storyline that we were talking about, especially on that grand final day. We have never seen a team in South Korea other than FearX and their previous iterations, or D+ and their previous iterations, take top spot in South Korea. That is just how top heavy and dominant it has been since day dot. And so that's such a significant storyline for Fabian and Pengu to jump in and make the changes that they have in such a short period of time with the language barrier that they are contending with is utterly fucking insane. Like, incredible. And I think it goes to show that if you can really drill in just really core solid fundamentals and have support staff that can veto properly, it just makes such a huge advantage, gives you a significant boost in a relatively weak region. So I'm super excited to see what they are able to do at the major. And actually, do we want to go into the Fabian statement now? Because I actually reached out to Fabian and just to get some thoughts on the stage and how they're looking into the major. And quick side note, actually, Fabian was super helpful during the stage itself. We had direct contact with him. He was giving us some really, really good insights. So shout out to him. And as for the major itself, he said, I think we are above expectations inside Korea, but nowhere near yet internationally. We will take a proper year before we are ready to compete properly. We are only on step 1, theoretically. We are very shallow and struggle with the pace that other regions will have. Any expectations would be unrealistic. We are here to learn. If we go out 0-3, we still had a very productive boot camp that showed a lot for the players on what they and we need to improve. If we win a map, I'll be very happy. If we make it out of phase 2, I'll do a backflip. So it sounds like Fabian is being very level-headed as to where the team is at the moment. He knows that this is going to be tough. I mean, He knows what he's doing at this point. So I hope they go in and have a bit of a splash and are competitive, but I think it would be very unfair to place really much expectation on them at all.
Very quickly to close out for Korea, a bit of controversy is Ran from Weeble has departed the team. Now, the organization put out a tweet. If you want, you can pop it up with the translation, but it basically says that Ran caused a lot of controversy by violating Ubisoft's terms and conditions. Therefore, they've decided to release Ran, and they apologize to the fans. Now, I mean, we can only speculate. I have absolutely no information. This was the first I heard of it. I posted into one of our team chat, and I was like, "Did you guys see this?" And I think you didn't even believe me, or like you were.
Yeah, I think you're trolling.
I was trolling or playing around.
I was like, source question.
Yeah, you're like, what's the source? I was like, well, the team posted it on Twitter. Look, I'll be honest. It seems like he got caught cheating to some degree. That's just the way I've taken the view from that tweet. If you violate terms of services, that's technically cheating, right? So I don't know what that is, if we'll see him again, but he was a phenomenal player. Like, he was really, really good for a team that looked like they could maybe contend part of the Big Four in Korea after their rise that began last year. So a little bit disappointing, and I'm very curious to see what the future will hold for Weeble, to some degree as well for Ran, and hopefully it's not quite like worst case scenario. I don't know exactly. Maybe it was a case of like he just did something that actually broke the TOS, but he wasn't cheating. I don't know. And hopefully that's all it actually was. Moving forward though, we'll go to Asia next now for a region that to some degree, we've kind of gone and got what we expected, which was in the end the Bleed Fury Grand Final, with Bleed then progressing through. Unfortunately, only one spot, and that's kind of like the biggest takeaway for me was when I was like covering this region the entire way through. I'm just sitting here like, how does this region only have one spot? How has Asia only got one spot to the major? The quality of Siege that we were seeing in comparison to a lot of teams from, say, South Korea, and we're covering both regions extensively, night and day. And I will say, in terms of an entertainment value, the one spot did give Asia certainly some credence in entertainment. It's essentially the Hunger Games. Like, it is literally the Hunger Games. You got Fury, Direwolves, Elevate, Bleed. They're all fighting for one spot. Throw in Jalita. And so suddenly you've got like 5-6 teams that are like all just absolutely going to and fro, giving everything they've got for one spot. Bleed come out on top of a pile, and just somewhat barely. They did get pushed to the third map in the grand final, but then 7-1'd it. And if we recall back, actually, Fury won the opening map, and then it went to overtime in the second map. There is every world in which Bleed could have chalked it, and Fury had gone to the major. Fury had opportunities on that second map, which was Consulate. They couldn't get it over the line, and I will say rightfully Bleed then make it through.
Yeah, and then even backtracking to the semi, Bleed got the favourable seeding, so skip first round. Direwolves, I mean, that was a slaughter, 7-1, 7-0. Direwolves, unfortunately, they were always on the fringe for that discussion, I think, for finishing in the top probably 2 at the beginning of the stage, and they didn't really do enough to convince us that they were going to subvert that expectation, and ultimately they finished below Jalita. So a lot of soul searching for Direwolves. Elevate as well, with the project that they were trialing with those imports, who had unfortunately really, really disappointing performances when it really mattered in that Fury matchup. I still have some flashbacks to that last map of Oregon where Fury just ran all over them in that semi. Elevate just couldn't keep pace in the BO3. But you're right, it is an incredibly, incredibly competitive region. It is a region that is deserving of 2 spots, or there needs to be a system in which APAC has a pooled number of spots and then they play off. I mean, that's ultimately where we need to get to, but who knows if that's ever going to happen. But Bleed, as you mentioned, rightly the winners. The really intriguing thing going forward now, right, is how do Fury bounce back? And if they do, and then take down Bleed heading into Montreal, there is then a world, especially if Bleed don't perform particularly well here at the Manchester major, we don't see an Asian team at SI, which would be that would be really frustrating. So I really hope there's not a world in which that happens. So fingers crossed Bleed do well at Manchester. I think they will. Unfortunately, they do start phase 1, and that's a discussion point that we'll get into in a little bit. So they're really going to have to fight from the trenches a little bit. Yep. So best of luck to Bleed. I think they'll do well. And they know that it's going to be a fierce spot to fight for phase 2, and they need to get as many SI points now while they can.
Now, we've still got a little bit to get through here. So I think for the Oceanic region, we'll keep pretty simple for what was a pretty simple stage. Bliss, no surprises, got through unscathed. The only 2 caveats is they did kind of drop some points in the group stage. They got pushed to overtime twice. Once by Odium and then the other by Panic, actually, of all teams for the final playday, which did kind of throw... I don't want to say doubt. Doubt's not the right word, but certainly some thoughts going into the playoffs that they were somewhat vulnerable. And then we saw that in the semi-final. Antic able to actually go and take a full-blown map. They beat them 7-4 on Chalet, and then in the response, Bliss ended up winning 7-0. And then from there, they won the grand final very comprehensively over Man Esports. It really wasn't much of a contest, and in the end, the Farmers League was quite farmed by Team Bliss. But I think what we can summarize, though, at least for the Oceanic League, was the quality of Siege certainly improved. Teams looked better mechanically, and what they kind of need to do now is stay together, keep improving during the offseason, keep looking to try and close that gap to Team Bliss, and Bliss are just going to then make everyone better by forcing that quality to improve. But ultimately, not too much of a story, I think, when it does come to OS. Bliss, far too good. They go straight to phase 2, though. What are the expectations, I guess, for them at the major? Having now started in phase 2, I don't even really know. What even are the expectations? Because typically, and this is why I'm a little bit dumbstruck here, usually it's like, get to phase 2. Well, you've done that now. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, well, top 8 at SI. I think the next step for Bliss, and I think I may have mentioned this on broadcast, is making it to live stage. That is their goal. They have never played in front of an audience. That's where every Siege Pro wants to be, and it would be absolutely huge morale boost for them and for the region as well. I think that has to be the goal. Grind through phase 2. Hopefully they have an opportunity to get there early, boot camp, prep properly, which I thought was going to be their downfall at SI, which ultimately it wasn't. So yeah, the expectation, I don't know if it's an expectation, but my hope is that they can make it to live stage, maybe finish in something like a top 6 or a top 4. I don't know exactly how that format's going to play out exactly, but it's going to be tough. Like, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And the unfortunate thing for Bliss is they are scrimming in OS in APAC, arguably the best they are the best team, so they're not getting properly challenged in a lot of these scrims and a lot of these practice, and that's why they need to go overseas, do a proper boot camp, get challenged by better teams, and then be better prepared for the event. And then also just quickly backtracking on your point about OS more generally, there's only 2 worlds in which I see teams catching up to Bliss. One, Bliss have to make a roster change for whatever reason. I think that would be out of their hands. Maybe a player retires or there's personal circumstances or whatever. Then they may be weakened and other teams can catch up naturally in that regard. Or, as you are sort of alluding to, teams need to band together, continue to improve, and slowly chip away. There's so many roster changes. There's so much personal beef. A lot of that gets in the way of development, and that's why Bliss will continue to be the best if they keep at this. So yeah, I don't really see them being knocked off a peg at all throughout this particular year. I think 2024, it's going to be another year of Bliss dominance. And hopefully at these majors, they can start making the live stage.
Into the Manchester major preview, which there's not too much to preview. We've only really got phase 1, and with that, the phase 1 bracket as well. Only a handful of teams, realistically. It's like, 8 teams to kind of look at here. So we're going to get the bracket up on the screen. So quickly going through it, Space Station versus Cruelty, Bleed versus CAG, which, I mean, I'm just going to get into it and say, why have we got these kind of like APAC teams versus APAC? I guess as of right now, though, like, they're not really APAC, right? It's actually Asia versus Japan. Virax versus GK, that's going to be a very intriguing one. And then we've got Team Liquid versus G2. Talk about, I think, what is the matchup of the upper bracket quarterfinals. Very quickly going through this, in terms of the predictions, expectations, who's making it through the upper bracket, only 2 teams. Is it fair to say the winner of that Liquid G2 game makes it out?
Yeah. I think that is an absolutely cutthroat match to open up the upper bracket quarterfinal, because I don't see any world in which Fearex or GK are going to take down either Liquid or G2. So I would agree, winner of that should be making it through in that upper bracket semi. As for the top half of that bracket, I think it's going to be a little bit more fiercely contested. I would envision that Bleed should be taking down Cyclops, although maybe if Bleed have an off day, Cyclops could win that space station, arguably should be taking down Cruelty. And so, yeah, an SSG Bleed upper bracket semi would be really, really intriguing. I think that's a tough one to call. I want to back in Bleed just because of the Asia bias, but I think it would be a pretty gritty best of three. And then, of course, they get seeded into the lower bracket. There was a lot of discussion about, does the lower bracket get flipped? I can confirm that it is flipped, and I was talking to Jesse actually about this, and he was saying that yes, 100% it gets flipped. It gets flipped at every event. Otherwise, it's not a lower bracket format. It's a GSL. So I don't know why there was ever any confusion around that anyway, but yeah, it does get flipped to confirm.
Cruelty coming in from LATAM, typically in the past we've seen Six Karma, Revan, so they've got themselves at least a different team. We've seen Cruelty before, we've done a little bit of LATAM, we did so at the end of last year, so intriguing to see that they've got a team that's been able to qualify from the LATAM League that isn't, the usual Six Karma or Revan. I don't think that they will be able to take down Space Station. I would love to see Space Station versus Bleed, and I think the reason why I would love to see it is I genuinely think it'd be a good series. I think that those two teams aren't there's not that massive separation between them. I think Bleed on their best day could certainly beat Space Station and get themselves qualified through that upper bracket portion. In terms of the lower bracket then, if we go through and say, okay, let's just say Space Station win and we'll say G2, then there's only two more spots. Team Liquid, Space Station. So again, it comes back to them, which does kind of then mean that for me personally, it's who's going to be that kind of proverbial fourth team? If we're looking at Space Station, Liquid, and G2 is all going through some way or another, who's going to be the other team that goes through? GK, Fearex, CAG, Bleed, Cruelty. If it's not Bleed, for me, that's a disappointment on the stage for Bleed. Bleed, for me then, having deduced and looked at all of the qualification pathways, have to get out of phase one. If they don't get out of phase one, I think it's quite disappointing. No two ways about it. For the rest of them, it's all about, can you win a map? Can you win a series? Can you progress to the semifinal? All of that. So for me, I've got Liquid, G2, Bleed, and Space Station getting out. I would imagine you would probably back that in as well.
Liquid, G2, Bleed, Space Station. That's what you've got, right?
Yep.
And that's actually possible with the flip, right? Yeah, I think it is. I don't want someone in the comments going, well, actually, they can't crawl because they play off each other in the semi-final.
Oh, I will say, I haven't actually quickly gone and looked
Liquid
at that.
G2, that's semi-final 2. They go upper bracket.
We need to put an animation that's fast forward.
Well, no, it won't, because Bleed will take on the loser.
Oh, right. So is there going to be a case where there's going to be some case where
one of the teams can cheese their way through and fourth because of the way it's seeded.
Right.
I think there was some discussion around that. I don't want to get too in the mud with that kind of discussion, but yeah. I definitely agree with your top 4 power rankings. If that logistically plays out is another story, but I think there's a pretty clear top 4, bottom 4 in this.
Yeah, I'll rephrase that then. I think that's definitely the top 4 in terms of power rankings. Whether or not that's the 4 that can actually make it through or should is a different story. I mean, I think, looking at it, there's maybe a world in which a Bleed has to play eventually a Liquid or a G2. And if that is the case, then that opens up the pathway. I'm not going to sit here and spend the time to figure out who plays who and all the flips and all of that. I'll just go with that being my kind of top 4 from phase 1. And I would say you would agree with that top 4 in terms of a power ranking scenario as well.
Okay, guys, I figured I would do my pick-ems as well and add them into this video. So if you want to do your pick-ems, you can earn rewards for doing so, alpha packs, battle pass, etc. I'll put the link down in the description. Feel free to copy my predictions or, of course, take inspiration from them. If I can find them, I will also flash up my SI predictions as well, so you can see what you're getting yourself into. The predictions are broken down into 3 different sections, and we'll be focusing in on the play-in stage for now. Teams that will qualify in the upper bracket, I have Bleed and G2. I have Bleed to take down Cyclops and then beat SSG in the upper bracket. And G2, I have taken down Liquid and then Fear X in that upper bracket as well. Then with how the lower bracket will play out, I foresee Cyclops being able to take down Team Cruelty and then beating Fear X, who lost to G2 with the bracket flip. I then see Space Station being able to take down Liquid, who will make a run after beating GK. I really hope, and I've visualized this bracket, so I really hope I've done it right. But those are my predictions. I think it is unfortunate. We're probably going to see a bit of an awkward bracket depending on how it plays out, where either Liquid or a Cyclops or maybe a Bleed could miss out just due to the nature of the bracket. There's also a chance that G2 don't have the best of starts to the tournament. They're a bit slow and then have to make a lower bracket run as well. There's a lot of different permutations to this, and it's honestly very difficult to predict. So let us know in the comments as well what your predictions are looking like, and we'll touch base after the play-in phase because I feel like it's going to be really hectic. So again, I'll put the link down below if you want to do your predictions and you can earn in-game rewards. And yeah, wishing everyone all the best with their predictions.
So we'll kind of move forward then to phase 2, which is where Bliss are going to be starting. But controversially, they won't be starting in phase 2 come Montreal. Regardless of what happens in this event, there's been some talk about this, but I mean, that to me is just not right. Like something has gone wrong fundamentally. The fact that Bliss can win the major and cannot start phase 2 at Montreal then is incredible. Like, I can be okay with if they start phase 2 this stage and then perform poorly, then yeah, sure. But like, there needs to be caveats. There needs to be protections in place. I'm not saying they're going to go on and win the major. They're certainly not. But the fact that that's a reality that could happen and then they have to then start phase 1, like your major winners from last stage are starting then phase 1 next stage, something's gone wrong. Like, regardless of what they do, by the way. Like, that's kind of the issue. Doesn't matter what they do at the major. Doesn't matter what they do next stage. Like, this is a team that cannot start phase 2 regardless of what happens at Montreal.
Yeah, so the reason for this caveat in the rules is due to the reduction of teams and how the distribution now works in 2024 compared to 23, where we had the 24-team format now down to 20, which, to be fair, is probably a more reasonable number of teams anyway. And I'll just bring up the tweet from James because I know he talked quite a bit about this, and he says, why on earth does a region get punished for in stage 2 for doing well prior to stage 1? Spots should be determined, but performance metrics not pass the parcel between 4 regions. It makes no sense, and it's got to change. And the main argument that I then saw from other reps in the community from Blast and Ubisoft was basically saying that there are 2 advantages for the tier 3 regions in 2024. OS gets one of them. How's that a disadvantage? The other 3 regions are competing for that spot in Manchester. If OS was in the running, they have a ridiculous advantage starting from phase 2. So essentially, they're trying to make the argument that because OS gets the bone thrown to them here for stage 1 at Manchester, arguably they should then be outperforming all of the other minor region teams naturally anyway, which would then pretty much automatically qualify them for stage 2, phase 2 by edging out all the other teams if you were to base it on the Manchester performance. I think that's a lot of shit because a team like Bleed should honestly be making it through phase 1, and then they're on an even playing field with Bliss anyway in phase 2 and have an opportunity then to surpass them. It's just a really awkward system. I think that this really should have been outlined very clearly going into Six Invitational 2024, that the best performing team from the minor region would get this advantage stage 1, and then the best performing team at Manchester gets that advantage heading into Montreal. I think that would have been very clear-cut, defined, and doesn't lead to bone throwing, which should not be the case in a competitive format. It fucks with the integrity. I think that's very, very clear and very obvious. If I was Bliss, I would be very frustrated. If they go on at this major to do even better than they did at SI, let's say a top 6 or top 4, or even fucking win the event, and then they get fucked over in Montreal and have to start in phase 1, and that screws them. They don't get many SI points, whatever the case may be. That would be very, very frustrating. So I can understand if you're in like the Bleed camp, for instance, or you're in the PSG camp, you might see it as being unfair that Bliss would be able to essentially double dip. But I think the onus should be on those teams to take down Bliss at Manchester and then earn that right in stage 2.
Yep.
So look, I understand it from both sides. Ultimately, though, I think the decision does fuck with competitive integrity quite a bit. and it sets an interesting precedent going forward.
Let's get into the predictions, hot takes as well, not just from us, but also the community. We'll start with the community as well. We've got some interesting little things to bring up. So I think you put out a tweet, if I'm correct, in getting some responses. How did that go?
So we put out a tweet. We also had some people bite on the Patreon, Discord, YouTube as well. And so there's some interesting takes. I'll say that much. I don't know which one you wanted to jump into first.
I'll let you take it.
There was a funny one from Jace's R6 who said NA pros will shit on the food for no reason. I thought that was pretty funny. But in terms of a more serious take, I think this one's pretty good from Mouse. He had 2 takes. Furia will somehow manage to win the whole major again. Again, previous W7M roster for those unaware. And M80 will win 0 games.
Wow.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually quite on brand for Furia, because to begin the stage for Brazil, I remember they were struggling a little bit. I don't know if it was like new org jitters, or maybe even over-celebrated SI. But I think I kind of agreed. Like, you cannot discount them. There's that D word for a reason in terms of dynasty. I can't remember who I was speaking to in Brazil about, what do they need to do at this major? Because, like, okay, they've won the last 2 majors plus SI. It's quite extreme to expect them to then win, say, the next 2 majors plus the next SI. Do they need to win the next 2 majors, or is the next SI the most important part of, say, overtaking that Penta G2 roster in terms of historical power ranking? And the consensus was to at least do really well at these majors. Like, they probably don't have to win them, but as long as they can then go on and win SI, be performing really well, be in the conversation, that's good enough. But I wouldn't be surprised if, they just kind of click into gear. It's LAN. They've been here before. Wasn't that long ago. The SI, like, where they, dominated, and they were, once again the best. And even in that event, they started slow. Like, even in that event, they had to go through the lower bracket. So Furia is just the kind of team where it's like they're losing and then they win. And you're just like, how? Like, even in the final map of the grand final, they're losing and then they win. So I think that's kind of like where I agree with Mousy. They will just somehow manage to win it again. I don't know how they'll do it, but they probably will. M80 winning 0 games. I mean, that's quite intriguing. I think when you kind of look at a lot of teams that are in phase 2, plus the teams maybe expected to make phase 2, to win 0 games. I mean, there's Scars in there. I mean, what happens if they play Scars? They're not losing that. So I will disagree with the M80 and I'll agree with the Furia.
Okay. I don't think the M80 call is really that outlandish based on some of M80's recent international performances, but if they can turn it up, I think they could see that.
They looked better in NAL as well this stage, so we'll see if they can bring that over.
The NA, not hate, but NA doubt did actually continue on with a couple of other points. Probably going to butcher this username, but Acrisius. I hope I pronounced that right. But the overarching sentiment was that no NA teams will make it to main stage. Also went on to talk about the EU home advantage that some of the teams like ITB and Secret, I guess BDS in that discussion as well, at least from an EU perspective, might be able to play into. What are we thinking about that? Is NA really in the dirt that much?
So I'm reading it, and I think there's some really good points here, especially Beast Coast being kind of like still a new team. There's also going to be, probably a lack of experience at this kind of level. We've already seen the M80 doubt, and I think that's probably a part of Acrius's perspective here. And I also agree, if there's going to be a team, it's going to be maybe Dark Zero. They've got the experience, they've been there before, did it very recently at 6 Invitational, and even if it wasn't like the cleanest NAL stage, they're still a team that you have to take seriously. They get to start phase 2. I think there's every world in which Dark Zero make main stage. I don't think that would be completely outlandish. And he even himself, despite having said no NA teams will make it, he's like, oh, but actually maybe Dark Zero could be the one. It's almost like he's talked himself into actually saying maybe Dark Zero being like the ones that could do it. In terms of EU home advantage, I don't know. Like, Europe's weird though, because like, is it an advantage for like Team BDS? They're a French team. They're not a UK team. ITB have an advantage. ITB have an advantage. Everyone else that's from Europe, nah, I don't think so. Europe's like one of it's a region. It's not a country, right? So I think when you look at Brazil, that's proper home ground advantage. But there's not going to be this like contingency of French people in the crowd cheering on BDS at the Manchester Major just because it's in Europe. So
hey, it could be. It's like a 30-minute drive. It's like a 30-minute drive through a tunnel or something, mate.
You know what? I forget sometimes. My Australian brain forgets that everything in Europe is like an hour away from each other, and I should know that because we went to Paris. But no, I don't think it's a home ground advantage for anyone but Into the Breach. And I think Dark Zero will make main stage. So there's, again, a little agree and a little disagree there. But lovely point, at least from Acris. So very much appreciate that.
I think we've got one more, and I'm happy to continue on and probably talk about this point. But it's from Gabriel on the Patreon Discord. So thank you very much for Gabriel. Sorry, my apologies. We appreciate your comment, as always. Why does Blast keep changing the rules seemingly out of the blue with changes like the new map veto for BO3, BO5, and for the major, the bracket for the phase 1 will be flipped? So I guess first addressing the bracket, again, to the best of my knowledge, this is not really something new. It was just, I don't know, some weird confusion, so it's not really that big of a talking point. But the map veto system, we were super, super perplexed when we found out about this, and we initially thought that it was not a particularly great idea. We didn't like it very much, and it seems like that has been echoed through a lot of the player sentiment and feedback that I have personally seen. For those unaware, the rule itself, I'm led to believe that the rule itself heading into 2024, the wording of it, the way it's implemented into the rulebook is the same. However, it is being interpreted and actually enforced differently. It's so convoluted that I don't want to get in the weeds too much. The easiest way to explain it is there is now a world in which you can pick your starting side on your map pick, which has the flow-on effect of teams now picking very defender-sided maps and starting on defense. That's why we keep seeing the likes of Skyscraper played a bunch. Teams will forfeit map 1. They don't give a shit about it. They'll let their opponent take their pick and start on it. They can go defense. It's a free shot, whatever. If we lose it, doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world. We'll then go into our second map pick of a super defender sided map, start defense, roll them, and then map 3 coin flip. This system is just really weird. I don't know if it's inherently or objectively bad, but it just doesn't particularly sit well with me. And it leads to these very dominant defender sided one-sided games. And with the 6-round half format, it can make for some really grueling and just downright boring games, to be frank. I did actually see some discussion. I think it was from Ferme on Twitter, who suggested that maybe we need to start trialing like a 3-3-3-3 split system. So you have your first defensive rotation, then you attack for 3 rounds, then you go back to defense for 3 rounds, etc. I think that could actually remedy this and make it a bit more palatable to actually watch and play. It does lean itself though into being maybe a little bit more confusing for viewers. I don't know, but yeah, I think that ultimately the veto system needs to fucking revert to what it was. I don't see why it had to have changed in the first place. That is the easiest way to explain it. I think it is maybe trying to alleviate the coin flip nature of the veto a little bit, but there's got to be a better solution than what we're getting at the moment, because I don't think it's great for the competitiveness of games or the viewership entertainment factor of them either.
Yep, I agree. I don't think there's too much more to add on to that. And from what I'm aware, I think it's definitely been made aware that there's, teams and players, especially more than just talent, that are, not quite happy with this. And who knows what that then means for stage 2 onwards, or at least into next year. And whether there's not just going to be just a reversion, but maybe changes in general, like you said, whether it's 3-3 or whatever it ends up being, to shake things up a little bit. As we look to kind of come to a close here for episode 22, we'd be remiss to maybe not touch on the fact that we will not be working the Manchester Major. This is something that we made publicly known when we wrapped up for the stage, which I think is the right way to go about it. We don't want to detract from any talent announcements or the other talent or anything like that. We said in the post-SI podcast, like, we were not expecting to work Manchester. For many different reasons. It still doesn't take the sting out of it, though. It still sucks to hear, hey, you're not invited to work this event. But but ultimately, this is not the kind of event that we're sitting back going like, oh my god, how did we not get this? We were so expecting it. Like, no. I think just to probably give a little bit of insight, like why we maybe were not expecting this event. It's an EU event. I don't know when this goes out or what the talent announcement's going to look like, which is typically a very late talent announcement. But it's going to feature a lot of EU talent. That's just the nature of it. I think that's quite fair. I think if we were to ever do an Australian major, I'd be quite disappointed to not work that. I'd be very disappointed. I'd be like, how am I not working an Australian major? And also even really any kind of APAC major for that matter. And I think that's something that we've seen a little bit. You think back to Atlanta last year, for example, heavily North American in terms of the talent crew. That's just the vibe that is something that Blast go for. And whether you agree with that or disagree with that, I'm quite impartial because, again, it swings and roundabouts. Like if we ever get an APAC major, I imagine then that will be in favor of us. And it's something that then leads into an expectation when it does come to these kind of events that, hey, that's going to be relevant in decision making. So at the end of the day, it's still disappointing. I think that's the main takeaway, that we don't want to sit here parading the fact that, oh, we knew we weren't going to work it. It's fine. It still sucks. Like it still sings that this is our job. This is our sole income. And when we don't get to work these events, it's a big dent. We also have aspirations. Like, yes, we got to work the SI Grand Final, and that is quite literally the peak. Like that is the pinnacle. That is the top of Mount Everest. There is nothing else that we can do now in our careers that is bigger than that. But I still would have loved to have gone to Manchester and followed on, and to show that wasn't like a fluke. We didn't just, put in one really solid performance and that's it. Like that we are one of the best duos out there. Like that's the way that I really want to kind of view us now. And unfortunately, we just don't get the opportunity to follow up and get to do Manchester. So we got to go back to the drawing board. We've got a bit of a break, and I kind of want to just take that break, re-energize, refresh. We'll obviously focus on the Jake and Guzz show, and we'll take a little bit of time, and then we'll come back stage 2, I think, probably with that fire in the belly kind of mentality where it's like, okay, we're going to really go even harder than ever so that we don't miss out on Montreal. Like that is the goal now, is that if we miss out on Montreal, it's going to be quite disappointing, even to a higher magnitude. That doesn't mean I'm expecting it. That doesn't mean I feel like we suddenly are deserved of Montreal. But that's from my own perspective, at least. I don't know about you, but it's kind of like I'm going to work even extra harder to make sure that we don't miss that event.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be obviously very candid, I mean, this is not our first rodeo of missing events. I mean, we have been there time and time again.
Obviously.
We are very, I would like to think that we are very resilient, and we use these opportunities to, reflect and improve. For me, it's not more so missing Manchester. It's just the continued issues around job security going forward, because we have absolutely no idea if we're going to get Montreal. If you don't get Montreal, well, you're probably not getting SI, and then your income for the year is half what it was last year. I mean, that's just the stark reality of it. Missing Manchester, honestly, in some regards, is actually okay. I feel like we've just been working non-stop for the last 3-4 months, and it's actually really nice to have this break, although it is quite a long one. So it's really just that anxiety and looking ahead at future events. At least personally, I haven't had an opportunity yet to actually sit down with Blast Ubisoft and talk about what that's going to look like, and if it's just a case of keeping our heads down and working, and that's going to be a strong possibility, or perhaps we did do something wrong and we need to improve. I don't quite know. So yeah, whilst it is disappointing and it is very unprecedented, I don't know of any main esport title that I've watched where your championship grand final casters don't work the next event. I don't think I've ever seen that. So it does feel a little bit unusual, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of factors, a lot of moving parts. We don't take it personally. It is what it is. And just looking forward to getting back into stage 2, working our asses off like we always do, and then hopefully we Montreal, and then I suppose SI on the other side. Because again, if we don't get that, then it's very much a case, especially now with, I mean, I know you're in a different life situation to me, but being 24, living in Australia, it's one of the most expensive places in the world. It's going to get to a tipping point where I have to be I either stick with esports or I don't, because if you don't get those events, the reality is I could go and get a normal day job and then make double what I'm making now and then not have any of the job security stress that I experience right now. So
Yep.
I really hope it doesn't come to that, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest takeaway for me is that, you know, when it comes to missing out on an event like this, like people have to kind of understand, at least for our job, it's like you might earn a decent amount of money for a very short period of time, but that short period of time doesn't happen often. There's only so many events. You know, going into Montreal, I think there's also going to be the Esports World Cup. I got no idea what that looks like as well, and quite frankly, it's not really on my radar. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. My focus is very much going to be on Montreal. But then it's like we have no guarantees. It's not like a case, again, people might be surprised to hear this, but it's not like, hey, you don't get Manchester, but we're going to give you Montreal. Like that, you don't get that. Like that's just not how it works. Quite frankly, it shouldn't work like that either. To be completely blunt, it should be really a case where if we performed well at the previous event, and we did because we got given the SI Grand Final, and I think we did an incredibly good job, that we probably should have got Manchester off of that. We didn't. Maybe there's circumstances as to the reason why, but alas, as you've kind of just pointed out before, this is not our first rodeo. We missed out on Atlanta. We missed out on events for years. I don't want to say that it's fine, because I think in some ways I want to kind of change my approach on it. I want to go from saying, oh, it's fine or whatever, to maybe not kicking up a stink or anything, but using that as fuel. Really using that as fuel to improve. And I already had a reflection period a couple of weeks ago, just as we kind of finished up the stage, and like, where could we have improved for the stage, for SI? And I think one of our strengths, being candid here, is that I think we're very good in the good matches. Like, we're very, very good. You want an arena broadcast where you want the hype, where you go to. If the game is quite shit quality, I think that's where we can improve, if I'm going to be candid here in front of everyone. I think when we're talking about like Playday 4, Korea League, and it's two shit teams, maybe we are too lax. Maybe we're too relaxed. Maybe we're not, too focused in on the game and just giving it its due. I've heard there's criticisms that we're too negative at times, which I somewhat agree and disagree with at the same time. I think you don't want to be overpraising of teams, and then it just defeats the purpose, because you're praising everyone. Then everyone's great. It's all good. It's all rainbows and sunshines. There needs to be some negativity. That's just the way that the reality is. If I'm negative to Team A, then it means that Team B, when I'm positive, it means something. It's not just like, oh, well, there he is once again, just like, shooting smoke up everyone's asses. So these are kind of the takeaways that I look back and take, and just kind of giving everyone a bit of a perspective into the casting life. And it's not a case of just rock up, do the show, and then leave. We look at our performances, we VOD review, we think about how could we have done this better, and giving some examples just then of some of our strengths and weaknesses is a really good way of keeping us on our toes and hoping that we can continue to be the best version of ourselves individually, but also as a casting duo, so that we can be there for Montreal. I saw a lovely sentiment from the community that, there was a lot of disappointment about the fact that we will not be working Manchester. And that's always really nice to hear as well. So I very much appreciate all of the comments regarding that. We will work hard to get to Montreal. We are not owed anything. We are not given anything. We worked for it. We worked for the SI Grand Final, and we got it as a reward. And we'll work hard to try and get Montreal, and hopefully get that, and then into Six Invitational as well. And that's the goal. That's where the focus will be, and that's what our future looks like. And as Guzz alluded to, if we miss out on those, then we might not have a future in casting. So that's
might be done. Yeah,
we might be done.
We say that as a joke, but it does eventually reach a tipping point.
It does, but like that's true. It's not really a joke. Like, quite literally, if we miss the majority of the work over the next year or so, it's only human, it's only normal to then look elsewhere. Whether that's another esport title, whether or not that's other work entirely. I mean, I'm quite fortunate. I have other strings in other games, and I'm able to get a little bit of work, even to a degree as well. Guys, we get some work in Valorant.
We did some Val. I think X Defiant has a future. Like, being loyal to a game only gets you so far. And I think I saw maybe Monte Cristo or someone talking about this a little while ago, is that as freelance talent, especially a single title, you have to be really careful and mindful of your allegiances. Like, I absolutely love Rainbow Six. If I wasn't working it, I'd be very disappointed. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to buy a house in Australia, and that is not fucking easy. And it's already difficult enough in the situation that we're in now. So, I would love to stay in Siege for as long as possible. I mean, we're talking about doomsday scenarios, and that's probably another thing as well to talk about very briefly, is that, was it last year stage 1 where it looked really bad?
Yep.
We had a situation where we got our initial offer stage 1 2023, and it was absolutely like a huge reduction. I think it was like 80% reduction or whatever on what we expected. And we were having like crisis talks. Eventually it did get sorted out and alleviated and whatever, but you do have a lot of ups and downs in this line of work. There's been plenty of time where we thought it's basically over and we'd move on, and then it works out. And so I would anticipate that this is going to be a similar situation where you sort of prepare for the worst and you get ready for that disappointment. But if it does pan out, so be it. Just like SI. We did not expect to get SI. We ended up doing the fucking grand final, which is insane. So
expect the worst, and then when the best happens.
When the best happens, then
be very happy.
Soak it up.
Yeah. So fingers crossed. And with that, we'll look to wrap things up here for episode 22. Hopefully everyone appreciates there a little bit of, raw in depth, and we will probably continue on with this discussion, I think, going into the exclusive portion of the Patreon, where we'll kind of just dive a little bit deeper into it. We are typically quite open and honest. We're okay with that, and hopefully everyone enjoyed a little bit of an insight there. Hopefully everyone enjoys the major. We'll be watching on and very much still excited for the event. Go Team Bliss as always in phase 2. Hopefully they can make it to the main stage, and hopefully we'll see you at the next major. That's the goal. That's the premise. In terms of the next episode, though, we'll look to, of course, have a couple of things coming your way. We've got X to Fight launching soon, so of course we're going to have some content around that, and then we'll have another episode pertaining to the post stage of the major over the next few weeks. So ramping back up in terms of the Jake and Guzz show. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. See you in the next episode.